It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. The Russian president has once again rejected accusations that his country is withholding gas supplies to Europe and using energy as a weapon against the West. Vladimir Putin called the allegations nonsense and politically motivated. He said Moscow is rather expanding gas supplies to Europe and seeking to ease the crisis there. His comments came as concerns grow over soaring gas prices in Europe amid high demand before the winter. Meanwhile, the European Commission has announced a package of measures to alleviate the problem. This includes the approval of tax cuts and the joint purchase of fuel by EU member states. Our correspondent Jerome Hughes joins us from Brussels to tell us the latest on this. We also have Tony Gosling, an investigative journalist from Bristol, who will break this down for us. Jerome Hughes, first over to you. It seems like EU has or is putting forward some solutions in order to, prevent the gas prices from increasing. Tell us about that, and of course the Russian reaction at this point and posturing when it comes to gas and its supplies to Europe.
That's right, Cave. Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the facts are that since the start of the year, gas prices, energy prices in the European Union have risen by 250%. So it is a crisis because ordinary citizens are really feeling the pinch. But there are if you speak to impartial experts, energy experts about this, they say there are very clear reasons. And the main reason, of course, is because so many countries have come out of lockdowns. So there has been much more demand for energy. Also, we had colder than usual winter and spring earlier on a few months ago, and therefore more of the supplies were used up. And in addition to that, we've had very settled weather since then. So in terms of wind energy, we haven't had as much wind energy being used or being, actually added to the national grid. So those are the key reasons. Now, from Russia's perspective, of course, it's in Russia's own interest to sell as much energy abroad as possible. Just under half of all the gas in the EU comes from Russia. So it's obviously a major, it really needs Russia's energy. But Russia wants to send more energy to the European Union. We have the Nordstream 2 pipeline, which was concluded at the start of last month. We're waiting for approval for that from the European Commission. It's the pipeline that runs from Russia to Germany under the Baltic Sea. And that means that, Germany will double its actual imports from Russia of gas. And of course, in theory, Germany then can supply to other EU nations. So it's in Moscow's own interest to sell as much energy as possible, just from pure economic point of view. But it always seems to come down to, it doesn't seem, no matter what it is, we always seem that the blame is put somehow on Russia. And even with all the factors that I pointed out, and these are independent experts that highlight these issues, of course the blame is still going to Russia. And we often hear as well from the European Commission, we often hear rhetoric talking about the fact that, the EU needs to end its dependence on foreign volatile energy suppliers. Well, if you look historically, Russia has been a very good and trustworthy partner in terms of sending energy to the European Union. I mean, that's just a fact. When was the last time we heard about a major crisis of energy being cut off to the European Union from Russia? We've never heard that. It's in Russia's interest to sell energy. It's in the EU's interest to import it because it's very cheap gas. And so that's the reality of the situation.
Well, Tony Gosling, the U.S. doesn't think along those lines and has blamed Russia for using energy, or gas in this case, as a political weapon, something that the previous U.S. administration, i.e. Donald Trump, also accused Russia of. Do you agree with the U.S. stance?
Well, I don't agree with the US or the European stance on this at all. It's obviously rubbish because it's the European Union that's blocking the gas from coming in right now. The Russians have finally built this pipeline, and alongside the Germans, with the former German Chancellor in charge of the company that built it. And now the whole thing is complete, Nord Stream 2 I'm talking about. The Americans did everything they possibly could to stop that, knowing that this would really weld together ties between the old Soviet Union and the Western Europe, which the Americans have seemed to have spent most of the time since the end of the Second World War trying to stop Europe and Russia getting on well together. Anyway, so it's Brussels which is responsible for this problem, and it's also Brussels which is responsible for the threats to the supply of gas and to the quantity of gas that's coming in, cutting off this option of Nord Stream 2, and they are responsible for this enormous hike in prices. Now, let's not forget that these prices are not controlled by governments, which they of course should be. These are basic essentials that people need to heat their homes and cook their food, and the idea that this is just going to be, I'm sorry, the free market is a joke. So there is also in the background to all of this, there is this increasing attempt to move energy from the whole oil, gas, coal, fossil fuel world into the new nuclear, solar and wind-powered so-called green world. Well, of course, nuclear isn't really green. So that's what I would say here, is that I think we've got the West trying to blame Russia. And when I say the West, I mean the sort of good cop EU and the bad cop United States, trying to blame Russia for their own oligarchy, who are desperate to stop any good relations with Russia. And by the way, last Friday there was a massive explosion at the Amur gas refinery in Russia, which is on the Chinese side. But of course, Russia is shifting gas right across the continent there. And this is, I think, suspicious. So it's not just, it's a refinery which is just about in the process of opening, and suddenly there's an enormous great explosion there, which I would say immediately we've got to be looking at, was this sabotage by the US or by other allies of the US to sabotage Russia's extremely good ability to supply the world pretty much with cheap gas. So that's another side of this. And let's remember also Henry Kissinger. Many years ago, I remember seeing this quote, I think it was in the 1980s, saying, control the energy and you control the nations. Control the food and you control the people. So I'm afraid energy is not just a price going up and down anymore. It's a massive geopolitical, geostrategic tool, which countries like the US and the EU, which is now obviously one country based in Brussels, basically, are using these methods to try and blackmail their own populations, and as a geostrategic tool to try to make Russia look bad. The only way they can get away with this is if they use their own media to spin this nonsense, and the journalists simply don't seem to dare to question it. It's obviously Brussels which has caused this problem by stopping the gas through Nord Stream 2, and nobody seems to want to admit it in any of the Western media.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jerome Hughes, I can't help but recall the former president of the U.S., Donald Trump. I mean, he did have charisma, because he said, you know what, forget the Nord Stream 2 to the EU, and in particular to Germany. Russia is using it as a political tool. But hey, I'm here, the U.S. is here, we can provide you the gas. And yet the president then, President Trump, was all for the breakup of the EU. So he had his way of, I guess, delivering the message from the U.S. So is this being politicized by the U.S. against Russia?
Listen, there's no doubt about it that there was massive pressure from the Trump administration to try and scupper Nord Stream 2, but Angela Merkel is very pragmatic. I mean, she puts things in different boxes in terms of the politics, in terms of energy security, and so on. So, you know, she was very pragmatic in that point of view, and she saw that the fact is they're getting cheap energy from Russia already. Let's increase that supply. But obviously Trump didn't like that, and to a lesser extent, of course, I'm sure that the Biden administration doesn't want to see that through. But, you know, there's another side to this issue as well, and that is, say, for example, the European Union did hit the panic button, and let's, for argument's sake, say that, you know, Russia could send tanker loads of liquefied gas to the European Union. You have to ask the question, why the hell would Russia do that? I mean, it's a constant anti-Russia rhetoric barrage every single day on a daily basis. The European Union is constantly blaming Russia for everything. It's a constantly anti-Russia agenda. And so it really begs the question, even if Russia could increase supplies overnight, which is a very difficult thing to do logistically, you know, why would it? Because it's constantly being put down, ridiculed, and you know, any number of accusations coming from the European Union to Moscow. And when Moscow asks for proof in relation to a lot of these allegations, the proof is never provided.
Thank you for that. Jerome Hughes from Brussels. We appreciate it. Tony Gosling, thank you so much, investigative journalist there from Brussels.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure, go ahead, quickly.
Just a final thing there, and that is that look, the Russians are doing everything they can. They're bending over backwards to get on with with Western Europe, and I just think it's absolutely, the only reason that Brussels has not made these good decisions in order to bring all sorts of trade and energy supplies from Russia is pressure from the US, and really it proves to me that Brussels is just really Washington's poodle.
And, of course, there are countries like Iran and Venezuela who have so much gas, but that's a whole other topic. Thank you. Again, Jerome Hughes from Brussels and Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from Bristol. And with that, we come to the end for this news review.